You're listening to Catalyst Talks, conversations with change agents, outliers, superheroes, and truly conscious leaders modeling what it is to be an unstoppable force for good and truth in this world. What lit these catalysts on fire to do their work, and what nuggets of wisdom can they share with a world literally on fire? I'm your host, Stephanie Trager. I'm a transformational catalyst and life coach to maverick change agents in business, leadership, and life. On this podcast, I wear an eclectic mix of hats, including Earthkeeper, Wayfinder, Truth Teller, coach, lawyer, business, and impact strategist. My intention is holding space for higher purpose, peak wellness, soul mastery, and deeper impact so we can live in harmony with ourselves, each other, and nature. Please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen. If you love it, please share and spread the word. We're on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. See the show notes on catalysttalks.com for links, and enjoy this episode. My guest today on Catalyst Talks podcast is Danny Almagor, returning again to share another layer of his brilliance, and that is wisdom in action. A few episodes ago, we had Danny on the show where we spoke about lots of wisdom principles and right relationship and really the philosophical aspect of empathy in business. And today, and you'll hear Danny's origin story in that episode. So if you're interested in catching that, please, it's a few episodes ago. And we will share a link to that show in the show notes as well. Just a short introduction to Danny today. He is the chair of Small Giants, a company he and his business partner and wife, Berry Liberman, started together to affect social and environmental change through business, investing, education, and storytelling. It is Australia's first B Corporation. And from investments in startups to large-scale projects like solar farms, green buildings, regenerative agriculture, Small Giants takes a total portfolio approach to prove that impact investing can span all asset classes and achieve both profit and purpose. So today, Danny and I dive into more of the practical ways he applies the systems lens, the systems thinking through some of the projects that he's working on, big projects that are reimagining how we deal with human waste, that we are reimagining how we deal with plastic. And this is a really beautiful conversation for anyone interested in solutions, in new ways to look at world problems, but also new ways to think about ethics, to think about the right questions to ask when looking at an opportunity. And I definitely have a lot of takeaway, and I'm hoping you do too. So stay tuned and enjoy this episode. Danny, welcome back to the podcast. It's awesome that I get to see you again so soon. And our last episode, we took a road trip of the mind. We went on an adventure through wisdom and concepts around consciousness and right relationship. And I really love connecting with you in those places. We can go there all day, right? But I'd be remiss not to share your breadth of experience, your knowledge, and the insights you have with all and around all you continue to create in the world, how you actualize from an idea and how you create outcomes from, mere imaginal cells. And so today I want us to go on a journey and, explore what you call wisdom in action. So for folks who missed the last conversation and Danny's origin story, you can check back 2 episodes ago, and we are about to dive in now. And let's talk about, from a business sense, your origin story from a business sense, and when you began, did you have this passion to create impact? And were you really, was sustainability a focal point for you, whatever that might mean for you now? And what did the impact ecosystem look like when you began?
You mean personally?
Personally, yeah.
I don't know. I think I've always been driven by a sense of something larger than myself. I don't know why that's a long, probably, psychology session or therapy session about, why I am the way I am. But yeah, I remember as a teenager and even in university, always being committed to something beyond just a job to make money. So all my life I've worked sort of for purpose-driven organizations, whether it's Engineers Without Borders or many of the other nonprofits I've been involved in, and even in work. The only brief work that I did was in outdoor education, where when I say brief work, I mean, paid for by someone else. But other than that, always started our own thing relating to impact. But Small Giants itself was started really as a sort of love child of Berry and me. Berry's my wife and my business partner. Really just trying to bring together all the things that we're passionate about, cared about making a difference in the world. So the impact side was fundamental. Investing, entrepreneurship, so creating things, businesses or innovation, and storytelling. So how do we change the narrative? And that really is how Small Giants started. And I remember it was 2007, roughly, around 2005 to 2007, that we were thinking about it, and really trying to find out who can we talk to that understands this. And I remember we went to a lot of advisors talking about how do we invest with impact, because the focus of Small Giants was investing. And a lot of them just said, no, that's called philanthropy. We don't know what investing with impact meant. We didn't use the term impact at the time. We just said investing with our values. We care about climate, so how do we invest in solutions? That was kind of the way we described it. And I sort of feel like the first stage, the first sort of part of our journey, which really sort of aligned well to the impact investing community, was this idea of what is it? By I think 2007 or 2008, there was the Bellagio, conference that came up with the term impact investing. But even before then, there were a whole lot of people doing this type of work, not knowing what to call it and how to describe it and how to define it. So I'd say the first sort of period for us was jumping in and just trying to work out what it meant. Some people thought it was social enterprise and discounted returns. Other people said, no, we can change the way the finance system works as a whole. It's a paradigm through which we see things. Other people said it's an asset class. So the first stage, I think, was just around that competition towards what is impact investing and how do we define it. And different groups were inputting their ideas and thoughts. I think by 2012, 2013, we got to the second stage, which is, okay, we had a good idea. There were groups like GIN, Global Impact Investing Network, that had come up with a good definition, and a lot of other groups that had come up around it, like Tonic as well, of course, that were starting to coalesce around this idea. And, the work of Ronald Cohen in the UK was big in this sector as well. So I think there it started to, we started to experiment. So in the beginning, it was sort of understanding what it is and who's involved and meeting each other for the first time. Then the next sort of stage was around experimenting and seeing, can we do this? What does it look like at scale with our own portfolios, for example, and comparing. And I think we got to that in about 2019, 2020, maybe, I'd say it really shifted. And it's not a date. These are sort of, stages. It really shifted to a mainstream conversation. That doesn't mean it is mainstream and it's everywhere, but it's definitely part of the mainstream conversation. So you go and you speak to Deutsche Bank or JP Morgan or in Australia, any of the major banks, Credit Suisse, all these guys, right? Goldman's, that bought Imprint. I mean, they're all talking about impact. BlackRock. So this kind of movement of investing with values across your portfolio, not just as part of your philanthropy, I think around, maybe it's 2018, 2019, around that time, started becoming the conversation that mainstream players were having. So that's kind of where I think I sort of answered both questions, where we came from, but where I think this industry is at.
Yeah, what I'm curious about though is your in the inner sanctum of your business journey. Like, you have this, there's a better way, and you want to do it at scale. What were you doing? What was your focus? What was your first kind of business venture? Or when Small Giants started, was it focused on one area or one theme? How did it become this larger portfolio approach?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first focus is, so if we think of the stages which we really followed, right? The first was working it out for ourselves. So I remember we set up a few rules early on. We didn't know what we were doing, and there weren't really many people to talk to learn from. So a few rules: we start small. We'd do investments that if they failed, it wouldn't destroy sort of our capital base, and it wouldn't destroy our emotional sort of fortitude to continue, right? So in other words, if you have too big a failure, either you're not able to continue because the business doesn't have the strength, or you don't have the emotional resilience to be able to continue as well. You just think this is too hard. So we were quite conscious of that in the beginning, and so we did a lot of early stage investments. We did a property development, relatively small in here in Melbourne. There was a beautiful development, sort of green building and stuff. We invested in a few early stage startups, including an organics company, and bought a magazine, and what else? Did quite a bit of debt funding to start up businesses that were, or growth businesses that were sort of aligned with the B Corp community. So a lot of these sort of small things that we did also some discounted return stuff as well. There's a famous cafe group here called Street Cafe that takes street kids and train them up in hospitality, similar to Jamie Oliver's 15. I'm sure there's a similar thing in the US. So lots of these type of things where we just experimented and said, okay, well, let's put a little bit here and a little bit there and see how each of these things go, and tried to spread it across asset classes, tried to spread it across different sectors, and just get a sense of what was out there and what we enjoyed.
So what does your day-to-day look like in that process?
Back then?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, back then it was just meeting cool people. Like it was super fun. We just meet people and opportunities, and as I said, a little bit here and a little bit there. So it wasn't really a deep focus. It was more of an experimentation phase. We really sort of said, well, what does it look like? So yeah, lots of meetings, lots of travel, going to conferences, meeting people like but both in Australia, sort of entrepreneurs and in innovators, but also globally, meeting people like Jed Emerson and Charlie Kleisner and all these groups that were around the world trying to set up a similar thing to learn from this Skull World Forum, SOCAP, great places to go and learn.
Yeah, and I ask you that because within the ecosystem, it's like everybody knows, but there's so many people who have no idea, right? About ways to plug in, ways to start. And that's really what that's when I tap into like, what is the transmission that can occur right here without having an agenda. I feel like there's so much, like you are just who you are and how you embody the journey, the practice. It's a real inspiration for folks who are like, well, how do I start? Where do I plug in? If you have access to any resources, what do you do?
Yeah, I mean, there are now a lot of places, as I mentioned a few, you can jump straight onto, and there are so many others, TVLI in Europe and so many groups and stuff that now have information online. There are books that have now been written, Impact, I forget some of the authors are great people, Morgan and what's his name, Joel Solomon, who did the Clean Money Revolution. Like so many great books you can read, and inside those books, they refer to all these other groups and people that are doing brilliant things. There's a lot of places to find it. Just Google impact investing, and you'll find 1,000 links. Back then, we didn't even know what to Google.
Yeah. And I think one of the cool parts about it is that anyone you talk to, no matter what stage they're in, it's such a unique journey, right? It's such a unique journey. So there's a rumor that you have something to do with circular economy in Melbourne. So is there a project you're working on around creating circular economies, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, the way we've thought about it, it's funny because you spoke about that early days of just experimenting. We had a few areas that we wanted to focus on. I think we've really developed our thinking across those 3 stages that I mentioned before, but really to systems change, which is how do we look at a system as a whole rather than sort of interventions in elements of the system. So you can deal with homelessness, so you can deal with gender equality, you can deal with climate change, each one of these independently, or to your point, circular economy waste. And then we started thinking, well, these things are all connected. So how do we design a portfolio and an investment thesis that integrates across these different areas? So what we did in Melbourne is we ran a workshop with Kate Raworth from Donut Economics, which is, I think, one of the best frameworks for systems thinking, because it really sort of identifies an entire system on a page. You've got the environmental limits on the outside, the human foundations on the inside, and all of the safe and just space. In other words, how do we design an economy in the middle? So you've got those two, that system on a page. So we had her come and do a workshop for us and invited all the people. And during the workshop, just people were so excited and writing in the chat, you know, what do we do? How do we take this to our cities, to our communities, to our countries? And at the back of that, we ran a series of workshops, because there's quite a lot of people there from Melbourne, around how we bring it to Melbourne. And that led us eventually to a project we're now collaborating with a whole lot of other partners. Over 100 different organisations are a part of this, called Regen Melbourne. And Regen Melbourne is asking the question, how do we bring Melbourne into that donut economic model? In other words, where humans can flourish and we don't destroy the environment. They're the parameters, you know, where people can live meaningful and prosperous lives and the environment doesn't die. And in that conversation, there are a whole lot of workshops, we came up with, what does that mean for our city? What are the things that we think represent flourishing? Of course, food, of course, you know, a voice like agency, of course, equality, but other things like arts and culture and other things that define flourishing for us in our community. And then we sort of set around a whole lot of projects and started asking both research and action projects around asking, how do we then deliver that? So an example might be a 100% bicycle city by 2030. How do we make it that if you wanted to ride a bike, you could get around anywhere in Melbourne without being afraid of getting into the traffic? And of course, bike accidents are really dangerous. So that's an example of a project. Or another one might be a swimmable Yarrow River. So the Yarrow River is the river that runs through our city, like the Thames in London. And over the past 30 or 40 years, it's just become a bit of a dump, and you wouldn't swim in there. Mm-hmm. And the question is, how do we revive this river, make it like a public access place for kids and adults alike to swim during summer? We can jump in and see this as a commons resource. At the moment, you can paddle on it, you know, but you don't want to fall in. So those are the kind of concepts that we ask ourselves. How do we create a food secure Melbourne? And what does that look like? What does the periphery or the peri-urban areas around Melbourne look like from a food production perspective, particularly with global supply chains being limited now? COVID showed us how vulnerable we are to global supply. What does it look like to create a resilient and regenerative city? And what model do we use? So that's the project that we took on, which is amazing because it takes in all of these different areas. Like, you've got to consider gender, you've got to consider affordable housing, you've got to consider waste and pollution. If you're going to, you know, all of those reflect each of the projects that we talk about.
And so is this underway? Is it's still in kind of ideation, or?
No, it's active. I mean, you can go to I think it's regen.melbourne.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is. But just Google Regen Melbourne. Yeah, we're working on it. We're currently calling out for Earth shots. You know, there was the moon shot that Kennedy did. We'll you know, put a man on the moon before the end of the decade, and we call them Earth shots. It's not our idea, but beautiful ideas on how can we solve some of the big problems on our planet. So we've asked, well, what would Earth shots for Melbourne be? Like a food secure Melbourne by 2030, or a 100% rideable city, or a swimmable Yarrow River, or you know, or zero homelessness by 2030. What would that look like? And of course, if you want to solve these problems, again, coming to systems thinking, we talk about action as opposed to just theory. You can't solve it just with homelessness issues, right? Yeah. Because homelessness alone is a function of a whole lot of other things: mental health, gender violence, like all of this stuff that lead to this, youth suicide and youth depression and anxiety. You've got a lot of things that come into the idea that causes, not alone, gambling and addiction. So if you want to kind of solve one thing, you have to look beyond that, social cohesion. So we have to bring in a whole lot of other actors and players, not just the homeless charities that are working on this issue, which are unbelievable. Of course, they lead that charge. But where does business fit into this? Where does the social sector fit into this? Where does the religions, the churches and synagogues and mosques and temples fit into these conversations? And that's what we want to do with a systems thinking lens.
So we touched deeply, we went deep into wisdom and right relationship and more of the kind of in the spiritual realm and the energetics last conversation. And so here we are talking about wisdom in action. And I'm curious where, where that fits. Obviously, systems thinking is a function of greater wisdom and expanding your mind and your perception. So what are you excited about, or what feels like the outer edges of those kinds of conversations where you might have a lot of people in the room and everyone might not be, say, on the same level of consciousness, or I don't mean level, but the same,
Yeah, I get it.
Lens,
I think you're thinking on the same plane. Listen, I think just to be clear, because we're talking about levels, we need big picture systems thinkers. Yeah. We also need really practical people. I mean, when I go to the doctor, right, I want the doctor to talk to me about their philosophy on capitalism and why capitalism, is causing my anxiety or my weight problems or whatever it is. I mean, that's great and good on the, but I want the doctor to say, actually, I can zoom in and look directly at what's happening in your life. And Danny, I need to talk to you about your workload, or I need to talk to you about the food that you eat, or whatever it is. I mean, so when we talk about levels, there isn't higher and lower. I think we need people thinking on different levels, and we need people thinking on the very practical and intimate level. We need people thinking on the very systemic and global level. And we need those people to be talking to each other, of course, because otherwise we don't, the practical doesn't inform the strategic or the systems thinking. And the systems thinking, of course, doesn't get implemented into the practical. So I'm with you. We need both. In terms of the excitement for me, is both thinking there and acting at the local. Think global, act local. Whoever, I don't know who came up with that, but brilliant, right? Think systems and act in acting community. So what's exciting me, you ask? I think questions around how do we create acupressure points, nodes in the system where if you push on that, you can actually change the system as a whole. Examples, again, not judging the positive or negative of these, but electric cars. Electric cars redefined the idea of transport, or electrification of transport as a whole, right, is a redefinition of the transport system. It's not, we could redesign the concept of a car, but here we sort of said there's an engine and we can make an engine better and we can work on efficiency, like getting a Prius or a hybrid. And then we said, well, actually, let's throw it completely the other way and say, it's not about efficiency of a petrol engine, it's a whole new engine. So that was for me, that's an example of a systems change mindset. We have a company that does waste management. So water treatment and water waste, this is human sewage or fish farms or anything like that. And the waste goes out, often we treat it through big chemical processes, reverse osmosis and other things. So these are energy intensive, these are tech intensive, and chemical intensive processes often that we treat our wastewater with. What we did in this company is started doing research on natural solutions. So we do have wetlands, so we can put wastewater into wetlands, and that's a beautiful solution. That takes up a hell of a lot of space because you need to create these very, very far-reaching wetlands to deal with the kind of waste that we have. But what we did is we noticed that when that waste goes straight into the ocean, it often creates an algal bloom. Right? That's when you've got high toxins and high nutrients and stuff. So we said, what would it look like if we tried to encourage using nature? So those algal blooms or seaweed blooms that we have, what if we took them and used that as the solution for the waste problem, instead of putting the waste in the ocean, and the ocean solves it through these blooms, because it's the ocean solution to super high nutrient levels. So we basically brought it on land and created these seaweed ponds that you put the waste in, and the seaweed essentially sucks up all these nutrients, because it's, think of it as poo and pee, right? Too much poo and pee, which these seaweed blooms love. So they suck that all up. The water becomes clean, goes back out to the ocean the way it came, or back into the river the way it came. And you can collect the seaweed, which is full of vitamins and nutrients, and you can turn that into a product that you can then go put back on your garden or feed to animals or whatever it is. So that for me is a systems thinking way of solving a problem. So how do we redefine the way we treat waste? And when I say that, it's funny, because probably 100 years ago, we definitely didn't have reverse osmosis. We didn't have these big plants that could treat waste. But probably then, we often just put it back into the nature and allowed nature to solve it. Here we're using nature as part of the solution on the journey back to the ocean, on the journey back to the river.
That's so, it's fascinating about, I'm hearing each of these pieces, and because you're thinking in the system, this is a systems approach to waste, where even one part of that journey, like algal blooms, how that is its own issue, not even talking about the waste. Like where I live on a lake, and I've recently moved here, and excited to get involved, because I'm like, why are you spraying copper oxide in the lake? Because there's algal blooms, and it has to be safe for kids to go in. Well, and so there, and
then you go back, like, why are there algal blooms? Like maybe not in your case, I don't know, but often it is that we're over fertilizing the farms. Exactly. And that runoff goes into the river, and that runoff, the over fertilization goes in, and then you've got like pH levels and nutrient levels that are way out of whack. And nature knows how to deal with things that are way out of whack by creating these solutions, blooms of certain types. Where, if you've got no coyotes, there becomes too many ferrets, I don't know, whatever it is in the environment. So you've got to bring, or wolves, you've got to bring them back to keep it in balance. Nature will see that. Nature will create, viruses and algal blooms and other things to try and put things back into balance. So that you go upstream and you ask, well, what are we creating, and how do we solve that upstream, rather than waiting for it to destroy the lake or destroy the river or destroy the ocean?
Yeah. And I think it is a function of mindset, right? You have to be in an ecosystem, unless you lead the ecosystem of mindsets, because not everybody, well, it is a journey to teach people. And so, yeah, so when you dive into a new area, say waste, before you understood waste, but you knew that was a lever point. Yeah. Where do you start? Where does your curiosity take you to say, okay, this is something I need to, you're just starting off in a.
Yeah. So I mean, we'd look at the sector that's waste or food and agriculture. And I guess in a sense, try and map it and see where it is, but also coming back to it, see where those points are of influence. So in waste, one, where we talk about wastewater, the example is, well, how do we treat wastewater that it doesn't become a problem for the environment, and how do we solve that through nature? So that was one example. Plastics is another obvious example. And so we asked the question, okay, where can we intervene on a systems level? In other words, redefine the concept is a systems intervention. With regards to plastics. Now, bioplastics are the obvious one. Could we create plastic that doesn't last for 1,000 years in our environment? That's an obvious intervention point that we can. So for us, we looked at that and said, okay, well, there are kind of 2 or 3 main solutions. One is eliminate plastics. The other one is recycle plastics. And the other one is create an alternative to plastics. And eliminating plastics, I don't think we're at that stage yet in our society where we no longer have the concept. But recycling and inventing alternatives like bioplastics, plastics that don't act in the same way in the long term, are good solutions. So that's where our focus energies are. And then in that, where can we have big impact? So another beautiful company that we have is invested in is Borreo, and they take fishing nets out of the ocean. So these massive ghost nets, fishermen of these nylon fishing nets that they put out miles long, and then they get holes in them and they get ruined, and eventually, you cut them and let them float, which is obviously disastrous for the ocean because just everything continues to get caught in there. And some of the more responsible ones obviously collect it and bring it back, but then they have to pay for it to get disposed of. So it's a problem. And this company came and said, well, why don't we take those fishing nets or their nylon, we'll clean them, we'll treat them, we'll recycle them and turn them into a product, and turn waste into food for another industry. And now if you ever buy a Patagonia hat, the plastic rim inside all the Patagonia hats are made from recycled fishing nets from this company, and a whole lot of other things. So that was a huge example. And if we talk about waste in the ocean, like plastic waste, fishing nets really sit up there at the top of the disaster chain of waste. So this is a huge problem with a very, very powerful intervention, at least in the short term, until we create an alternative to fishing nets. But for now, we can incentivize fishermen not to drop the nets in the ocean, but to bring them back because we can pay for them and turn it into a product. Another example is as I said, bioplastics. So you come into this idea, and there's a great company we just did investment in called The Great Wrap. And The Great Wrap is a Melbourne-based company, so it's beautiful. It's also local. And they're making like cling wrap out of potato starch and food waste. Super cool. So if you think of wrap, we wrap all of our containers and pallets in this wrap. And like I went to the airport the other day, it still blew my mind that people are still getting their suitcases and wrapping it in plastic, just, I don't know, in case somebody gets in there and puts drugs in, or I don't know what they're doing. I travel a lot and I've never had to wrap my bag in plastic. But they do. And I looked at it and I just thought, oh, it's killing me, like all this plastic. And these guys saw that same problem and said, let's solve it and create this biodegradable plastic wrap that you can literally throw in your compost bin and will biodegrade after, 6 or 8 weeks. And so you're looking for solutions like that. And of course, they're not the only company. There are lots of them, but we need to invest in that. That is a systems change solution to the role of plastic in our society. That's how I think.
Yeah, I love that. So I'm here. So there's the stop the harm, right? There's the stop the harm. There's the like repurpose and, solve. And then there's this bigger systems change where what do we have to do that's new? And one of the things that I focus on a lot is what in that place of the new, because what are the guardrails for the unintended consequences? And I sometimes I'm mindful not to sound like a curmudgeon, but I want, sometimes we need a curmudgeon in the room to point out things that we don't necessarily all want to see or really dive into or explore. And so I'm curious if you've had, in your conversations in the donut economics model, where that, let's just change the name curmudgeon, but sort of the mindful optimist, the what?
The philosopher, yeah, the ethics committee. I mean, yes. I don't think you should frame it as a curmudgeon. I agree. I think it is an ethics committee, and it's part of the innovation. Albert Einstein knew it very well in how he discussed, the power that he unleashed with some of his thinking that led to the atomic bomb. We need to consider the unintended consequences, and of course, we make them not unintended by being conscious of them. We can solve for many of them. Sometimes you can't. There are going to be things that we just don't know, which is why we often lead. And again, this is our strategy, and I respect that others have different strategies, but we always lead to where we can to nature-based solutions. So something I know for sure is nature has been experimenting with algae and with seaweed for over 1 billion years. So the first life form on the planet essentially was algae. And so we've got over 1 billion years of R&D. So if that's got a problem with it, we've probably seen the problem. So if we can come and use algae as a solution, algae and seaweed. Algae is microalgae and seaweed is macroalgae. So I use the terms interchangeably because in that business, which is called Regen Aqua, we use macroalgae, we use seaweed. But there is an unbelievable innovation that's taken, as I said, over 1 billion years to refine to solve this problem. We can also create a mechanical solution or a tech solution that is new, but we don't have all that time to see how the unintended consequences will play out. So if we do genetic engineering, well, we don't know, we're uncertain. So it's not a bad thing. It's just like, you know, if I can be pretty certain that there are no negative consequences of this one versus this one, which also solves a problem, but a whole lot of unknowns attached to it, I'd go for the known solution. So we look for the possibility for nature-based solutions. Again, use algae as opposed to tech solutions to clean water. Use regenerative farming as opposed to cell-based meats, for example, to solve our protein problem, like, you know, whether it's meat alternatives and other things. But, and again, I'm not poo-pooing these technologies. I just think we don't know. We don't know what the value of food is, you know, that's been grown in a test tube. I just don't know that. And do we lose something? Are there things in the soil that give food nutrition, that give food elements? Is there a metaphysical element to the food that we eat? I don't know. But, you know, in other words, like, what does it mean to have, you know, to have life in the food? If it's grown in a test tube, it's never ever been living. You know, we're living beings, so we're ingesting something that is just, you know, like if I could eat a pill and the pill has got all the nutrients that I need and I no longer have to eat food, like, would my body respond as well as it would if I was eating the food? Are there all these extra little bits and pieces that are attached? So they're all the questions I think we need to ask. The answers sometimes might be we don't have an alternative. We have to go to a technical solution. But where we do have alternatives, where we can go to these longer term natural solutions, we can avoid a lot of those unintended consequences. Because if I say to you, let's plant 1 million trees, like, unless I'm, you know, again, being conscious, planting the wrong tree in the wrong place, or introducing cane toads to Australia, by and large, you plant, you know, you plant eucalyptus forest in Australia, you're pretty much doing okay.
Mm.
And that's the mindset we should be having, I think, around unintended consequences. How to go back to the simplest solution that we can.
Love that. Yeah, we were talking about technology before we came on here, and you said, what did you say? You said, I don't know if technology is the answer.
Well, what it does, it also removes our agency, right? Like the more high tech we get. So farming is not about planting a tomato in a garden, right? Which, as long as we've got seeds, which again, nature has served us well by creating a hell of a lot of tomato seeds every time you get a tomato. Planting in the garden, I have complete agency. You know, if something goes, I can do that myself. It's not this incredible sort of system that requires all these other people. Again, nature's worked that shit out. But if I'm growing food in test tubes or in, you know, in particularly hydroponic and temperature controlled environments, and that goes wrong, well, most of us can't solve that problem. You know, that becomes only a limited group of experts that can come and resolve that. I saw that in my, my house. You know, something happens, the electricity goes, and I have to call the electrician. So you can see that removes. But if the table is wobbly, I can always, you know, put a little piece of paper under the table and make it less wobbly. So you can see, where can I solve the problem? Where can we give agency to the individuals to also be able to interact? And where do we remove that entirely? And I think as we develop more high tech, and it's not to say high tech is bad. So my computer stopped working, and I actually went home. When the internet wasn't on or my computer wouldn't turn on, it's essentially irrelevant for me to be at work. I go home. Now that is a profound agency loss in my mind around the concept of work. That if I can't have internet, I can't do anything related to my job. So I think that's where we should be thinking about it. Not to say technology is bad, but just how do we temper this sort of technological race to solving everything with high tech, to the idea that we as humans have agency. We can live a meaningful and purposeful and service-based and joyful life, not relying on that many others. And I mean that not from a community perspective, from a technology perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I look at technology also. So that's the individual, like our individual agency in our day-to-day choices. And then the technology, I mean, like what we don't know, sort of an unintended consequence, is the electrification of the planet. And what is that? Because even if you figured out how to live and, put the piece of paper under the table or figure out your own electrician, not needing an electrician, there's still this like, well, what is my agency of being bombarded with these EMFs, and the electrification of the planet is changing, and it's changing organisms and frogs and how birds communicate. And so how do we, like, that is another part of the equation that I don't always hear in the conversation around like smart cities and like what these brilliant solutions that have such a huge impact, but what is the unintended consequence?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know, like I'm not an expert in electromagnetic forces, but I do have to, I guess I have to acknowledge what you're saying, which is we don't know. And does it interfere with birds' radar and ability to hone, to navigate? I don't know the answer. And so I don't want to delve into it, but I think your question is right, which is, what don't we know about this solution? What can it create that we haven't considered to date? I haven't thought so much about the effects of electrification from an electromagnetic perspective, but more from a human behavior perspective is where I think about it and say, does it connect us to each other? Does it connect us to ourselves? Does it connect us to nature? If it doesn't connect us to ourselves, each other, or nature, then is it really adding value? It might be more efficient. It might, allow us to move faster. But if it's not connecting us, to our inner selves, to our community, and to nature, I think we have to ask, is it worth doing? And the smart cities, again, I think we should explore that question.
Well, it's connecting us.
Well, yeah, and the answer might be yes. Again, when we ask the question, it's not an implied answer of no, right? And I think that's why I don't think the concept of a curmudgeon is a good idea, because curmudgeon says no. Curmudgeon says, this is new, I don't like it.
Yeah.
But the ethics committee says, this is new, this is really interesting. This could be profoundly positive, and it could be profoundly negative. And how do we examine and make sure that on balance, it is more positive than negative? That's what a good ethics committee would do. And we all have to develop that ethics committee internally, because we don't, not every startup and not every business has these wisdom keepers, Peter Singer or AC Grayling, or all these great, Simone Will, or these great philosophers who can ask questions of what's right and wrong. But we do need to develop some of those questions inside. So what you're saying is really right, without the assumption that the answer is no. I think this is unbelievable that we're able to communicate. I love the fact that I can make phone calls. I remember when I was 18 and traveling around the world, I used to have to call. I was in Nepal. I'd call home to tell them I'm okay, and it was like $4 a minute. And you get on the phone, Mum, I'm okay. I'm in Nepal. I'm good. I'll call you in a month, right? Because like you didn't have enough money to have a good long phone call. And now, like, for no cost at all, I can send an email or a Zoom call or FaceTime or whatever it is. It's amazing, right? Sometimes the outcome is incredibly positive with technology. I just think what we need to do is continue to remind ourselves it's not necessarily positive. It's not always positive. Because there's a technological solution doesn't mean it's a better solution. We just need to ask questions.
I love that. I love the ethics committee. I always forget that is an option. Do you have, is that something that you will notice is missing in, say, a new venture or a larger conversation around systems? Like if there is no ethics committee, is that something that you might point out?
Yeah, again, I mean, in ethics, in fact, I never thought to actually set up an ethics committee for every business. But you see, just that was my watch. I got this Apple Watch for my birthday, and every time I talk, like Siri answers and she tells me stuff. Like I wasn't speaking to you. I was speaking to someone else, but Siri thinks it's. But an ethics committee, I did have a meeting the other week with someone who was promoting a new business, and they were talking about, interestingly, what we discussed before, which is growing food in a lab, not in soil. When I mean lab, I mean hydroponic. I mean literally, cell-based stuff. And I just said, have you guys, as an organisation, it's not bad. We need to feed people, and there could be beautiful consequences to this, like if we need very, very pure foods to deal with pharmaceutical or compounds for pharmaceutical needs and stuff. There's a possibility that this is going to be a brilliant solution to a problem. But the question I asked is, have you guys thought about where this might go if it doesn't go in the direction you want it? You're a good guy, right? But I think when Facebook started, they probably didn't think much about, affecting global politics and national elections and, dictators around the world. I don't think, Twitter thought that, they would create a generation of anxiety or Instagram and sensitivity around how we look and feel about ourselves. So I asked him, okay, well, they're examples. They just started off with a cute little idea. So this is a good idea. What are the potential unintended consequences? Literally, I was his ethics committee. And he said, we haven't thought about that. We didn't think that was our job. And I said, well, whose is it? And the challenging response, which I completely understand, is if we don't do it, someone else will, right? And that's that multipolar trap, the prisoner's dilemma concept that if I don't if I don't tell the authorities about you, you'll tell the authorities about me. So it'll happen no matter what. If I don't create this nuclear weapon, somebody else will, and then we'll be the lesser for it. And so I understand that, but I don't think that's an excuse for not asking the questions. Maybe you ask the questions, you come up with an interesting answer saying, well, this could be used to genetically modify other things, to grow pathogens, to destroy our food system, etc. So what can we put in place? We still think it's important to do, maybe. What can we put in place that will protect us against these unintended consequences? So it doesn't always mean even a no, don't go there. It just asks different questions. What should we lobby for? If we're the first people to invent this, we probably will write the policy and legislation for government. Imagine these big tech companies stepped forward and said, here's what we think. Twitter and Instagrams and Facebooks and all those guys turned around, even Google turned around and said, well, we know that this industry could be abused. So here are some techniques we think would protect this industry. Of course, not just self-interest, which is all they've done, just try to create rules around allowing them to maintain their authority and monopoly. But what would that look like? They could have set different rules. They could have helped government design a system to protect us from the worst elements of social media, or the worst elements of genetic food production, or the worst elements of nuclear power, or whatever it is.
I think we're touching on something really key here around in the systems conversation, that not just like, oh, there needs to be an ethics committee with these types of questions, though I think like when you take, any of the facets from the big idea person to the logistics, mechanistic folks who need to put it, think about the solutions and create. I think that there's so much that needs to be developed around the concept of an ethics committee and, different worldviews, and really because I think if we look back at history, that's the thing that will change how, a beautiful idea of a beautiful world and this new system could actualize.
Yeah. And I think you're right. We could have a whole episode on how to, what is this ethics committee and what does it look like for business? One for another time is whether the system of innovation through corporations is even the right solution. But holding that aside, you're right. Questions around what should the fundamental principles or values of that ethics committee be? Because in and of itself, it still needs to create its framework. Mm-hmm. So you might say that beautiful concept of 7 generations. What does this look like for future generations? A great book by a guy named Roman Kusnarik called The Good Ancestor, and asking how do we acknowledge our role as an ancestor? We are ancestors of future generations. So rather than looking at us as the descendants of our ancestors, what would it mean for us to be ancestors for the future? And again, a lot of Indigenous wisdom talks about this. So that would be an example of one of the frameworks in which that ethics committee should go. So what is our responsibility to future generations? How do we see future generation stakeholders? Mm-hmm. One example. And there'd be a lot of others, like unintended consequences about the current people, like who are those that will suffer the most, who are those that will pay the most, where are the externalities attached to this? I mean, these are the obvious things. But also I would encourage an ethics committee always to look at the positive as well and say, we're not just there to look at the bad stuff. How can this potentially open up a new space to solve problems? How can this technology or this intervention or this project support a system that is better for the planet and better for the people on it? So, you want to create, you've got to create your structures for that group, for that way of thinking. And again, whether it's a group, whether it's an ethics committee, or you just say we're going to set aside time in our management teams to talk about these questions, or sign up to one of a course on ethical leadership or ethical decision making, or whatever. There are lots of ways that you can approach this, not just another structure on top of your business.
A master's in business and empathy through Small Giants Academy.
Yes, that's hopefully one other way. We're going to be talking about that tonight. We've got a governance conversation, and we talk about this. When is it just time to say no to something? And how, beautiful question. When have you ever said no to a business opportunity that you knew would be lucrative because you thought it was the wrong thing to do? I don't know. It'd be wonderful for that to be a case study at Harvard. When to say no.
Beautiful.
Maybe they do.
When to say no? These are some really good questions I'm going to tease out here when I sort of add to the show notes. So I was reading something today, like a law blog I have about, I used to be a lawyer, and I used to love the idea of a legal argument. And so I could read anything and just because there's like 45 layers until you get and connect all the dots, and it used to like really arouse me. And I was just reading this and I was like, this is just doesn't make sense, And so I think that what I love about this conversation, where we're going with this ethics committee, is, you can have laws and there's all these processes, procedures, and really cool intellectual exercises. And at the end of the day, I think this more simple, the more we simplify and really we can listen to the last episode, but the more we connect with our hearts and simplify and bring all players on board. And I think if I'm a philosopher, I love hearing the perspective of somebody who is like the tactical hands-on person, even though that might not be where my mind is. And then how do we trade information? Because I don't know if this makes sense, if I'm going anywhere with this, but I'm just in this process of how complicated are we making everything?
Yes. Well, just something that came up when you mentioned the law. And I think the challenge with the law is about dogma. It's about rules, right? And it's complicated to create rules about everything. If there's a rule about how to greet yourself when you meet another person, like put out your hand to handshake, or whatever, say hello, like we teach our kids, this is how we do it. But to create rules around that, to create some kind of a structured framework, becomes really complicated. So I think we can't rely on the law to set culture. Right? Culture has to be something that's way beyond that. Like there are there are social norms rather than just rules. And I think that's where a lot of ethics comes in as well. Of course, there's a rule, don't steal. That's obvious, right? But is it stealing if I took an idea that you shared with me and told everyone that it was my idea? It's not IP, so there are things way beyond the technical. And we don't want to create a technical law that you can now sue me if you shared an idea and I shared that and said it was mine. It's just wrong. Just don't do it. Just say, hey, that idea, Stephanie was the one who came up with it. She's brilliant. That's kind of what we do. And I've seen that a lot in business as well. I've done business with people who are very technical and said, well, I don't need to do this for you right now. It's not in the contract. And it drives me crazy. It's like, where is the relational space? Where is the sense of responsibility to each other as humans, the responsibility to each other as a community, a society, not just, sorry, the contract didn't write that, that if your dad dies, you don't have to, pay that amount on the Tuesday. I don't have to give you to Friday, right? It's not in the contract. And you go, but something happened in my life. Can you be a bit, lenient? And that would be a question that you have, like where does that fit in? So I'd come back to your point, like reading legal arguments is wonderful, but we have to go beyond that. We have to ask the question of what type of society we want, what type of businesses do we want to run? And it always comes back to the relational in my mind. The laws are just where we cross the edges of the boundary, where you don't steal, don't kill, don't commit fraud, don't trade insolvent. There are some good guardrails there, but most of the guardrails are social guardrails or cultural guardrails. And it's complicated. So yes, try and keep it simple, but these things it is for human discretion and wisdom. And I don't know if I just went all over the place there, but keeping it simple is complicated.
Yeah. Well, the level of discretion, the cultural discretion in interpreting law is a whole other conversation. So right.
As well as a legal system that is an adversarial system. So in other words, we learn to debate by taking a for and against on an argument. And as an engineer, so you studied law, so you're told, is abortion right or wrong? Let's have that, and clearly in America, that's a big conversation. But there's a for and against, right? And we have to fight for who, and somebody wins that fight, the law gets passed. In engineering, we don't fight. They say, how do we design this really good bridge? And you don't say, well, I think it should be a suspension bridge and I think it should be an arch bridge. And they fight until someone wins. It's like, okay, guys, let's work together. Oh, what's that? That's a good idea. There's an advantage of an arch. There's a real good advantage for the suspension. Okay, let's work on, it's a team. It's one team solving a problem rather than two teams trying to fight against which solution is better. And I'm not saying that sometimes the adversarial model comes up with some great outcomes, but I think we've created an entire system in the legal profession where it is entirely adversarial. And we're not trying to say, actually, what would a really good law look like? What would a really good system look like that serves, the community and you decide, what does that mean? We don't seem to do that anymore. I don't know why.
Philosophy and engineering. So I want to give you back your day because you're about to start it, Danny. So yeah, that is a beautiful, I'm going to chew on that. And I hadn't thought about engineer and, the engineering model that way. So how would you, share one more nugget of wisdom for listeners out there who are solving problems, and what would be one of your wisdom approaches?
Well, maybe on the back of that, it is how do you, so the last example, we're talking to a venture fund about one of the investments. So this is a plastics, a bioplastics company, another one. I mentioned the Great Wrap, this is another one. And we shared it to a venture company, and the venture company said, oh, we can't look at that because it will be conflict of interest with the other early stage bioplastics company that we have, right? So their mindset was this adversarial, like, you know, we went for one, we couldn't, you know, and I looked at it and I thought that's crazy. Why wouldn't we get them to talk to each other, right? Like maybe they're competitors, but it's a big market out there. And for B Corps like us, I don't see another investment house as a competitor. I see them as a collaborator. Maybe we could do something together. Right? So I thought, why wouldn't you bring them together? Why wouldn't you see this as an opportunity to collaborate and co-create? Anyway, I rang up the company and said, listen, you know, would you be open to meeting with these people? They're not, you know, I don't know that they would necessarily be a competitor. And at the end of the day, we took, rather than that competitive approach, the for us or against us, we took the collaborative approach, and it was wonderful. And so, again, I think you can take that into business as well and ask. Obviously, there are rules. You know, you don't want to. Collusion is a bad idea in some countries. It's illegal, so be careful. But there are certain things you've got to watch out for. But by and large, look for the possibility for collaboration. For us, when we invest, we do that all the time. We're trying to say, actually, you guys, you could do really similar things. Talk rather than you do really similar things. Let's build a wall between you so you can compete. I'd push that back. So again, everything that we think on that philosophical level with ethics committees or adversarial versus collaborative approaches or you know, systems thinking versus the detailed solutions, I'm trying to show examples each time of bringing them together, right? Putting them in action in the work that we do as best as we can.
Building bridges.
Building bridges. It's all like, that's the engineer. It's all about building bridges. Connection. It's connection.
Building bridges, asking amazing questions. This is my takeaway from you today. Building bridges, asking really good questions, and putting wisdom in action.
Yeah. Love it. And none of them are my ideas. I'll give credit to thousands of people and books that have informed that. And thank you to everyone's shoulders whom I stand on.
Yes. And everyone has their own flavor and their own contribution and their own energy. And yeah, thank you for bringing yours.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good to see you again.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Catalyst Talks. Stay tuned for what's up next, and please subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen. You'll find those links at catalysttalks.com. Join us. We continue this conversation on social media, and if you'd like to reach out to me privately, you can send me a message at stephanietrager.com. Your attention here means the world to me. Thank you.